An American citizen who is wanted on drug and murder conspiracy charges was extradited from Juarez to the U.S.
November 9th, 1999, Oziel Cardinus and about 15 armed men cornered 2 U.S. DEA and FBI agents in Matamoros. That bold move sparked a massive federal crackdown.
The law enforcement community, both federal and state and local, are committed to eradicating that danger so people can live in safety.
One that would seal his fate. Now we're breaking down the tragic endings of some of the most feared drug lords behind bars. Griselda Blanco. In 1983, Griselda Blanco paid huge sums to people who could help her locate her third husband, Dairo Sepulveda, who had run away to Colombia with their son, Michael Corleone. After their separation, the pair could not agree on who should have custody. So, Dairo kidnapped the boy. Blanco had him assassinated and took their son back to the United States. But that was not the first husband she killed. Blanco's first husband, Carlos Trujillo, remained in contact with her after their divorce. They met when Griselda was only 13 and had 3 sons together. Therefore, they had established trust and continued to be business partners. However, things would go awry for Carlos in 1975. Business numbers were not adding up, and word got to Griselda that her former husband was responsible for the missing money. She believed the informant, summoned Carlos, and shot him dead. If she could execute people she used to have romantic relationships with without blinking, think about what she could do to a complete outsider. Such is the reputation of Griselda Blanco. She was responsible for many killings, which ultimately led to her getting noticed by law enforcement agencies. It was the beginning of the end for her. When the names of women pop up among the cartels and drug empires, it is usually as a wife to the drug lord or someone who helped with finances. As for Griselda, she was the boss, the one calling the shots, earning her the nickname, the godmother of cocaine. She was also called the Black Widow due to her penchant for killing her husbands. But she was known not only for her ruthlessness, but also for being business savvy. She ran a massive cocaine empire that moved shipments and large sums of money between Colombia and the United States. Something stood out about Griselda. Whenever she was involved, people were sure to get killed. All that mattered to her was getting her drug business done. She was reported to be responsible for over 200 deaths when she was running the Miami drug business in the 1970s and 1980s. Griselda was notorious for embracing the cowboy-style shootouts that were associated with cocaine businesses. When she was finally caught in 1985, it was in her home in California. Despite years of evading capture, DEA agents eventually caught up with her and charged her with drug trafficking and the murder of 3 people. Even when she was sentenced to prison, her business empire continued to operate. She still commanded respect, but she was no longer untouchable. It was only a matter of time. Her influence waned, and her business died slowly. With no money to assert her power, business allies turned elsewhere, and she was left on her own. Things became worse when one of her hitmen testified against her. She lost everything: money, influence, friends, and even her mind. Luckily for her, she had good lawyers who were able to find a loophole in the law. They helped her gain freedom, but almost 20 years had already passed. The world had moved on. She realized this and moved to Colombia to live quietly, but her past would catch up to her. On September 3, 2012, as Griselda walked out of a butcher shop, 2 men parked their motorcycle beside her and shot her in the head. The cartel queen who had ordered multiple drive-by killings was killed in the same way. Her prison fate stripped her of all her power, but what about a drug lord who founded an entire drug trafficking consortium? Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela. The Cali cartel was one of the biggest drug empires ever, and one man who helped to establish the business was Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela. Born January 30, 1939, Gilberto started his life in Mariquita, Colombia, about 100 miles from Bogotá, the capital and largest city in Colombia. However, his start to life was a sharp contrast to the reputation he built later in life. While many drug lords were born into the business, Gilberto's father was a painter, while his mother was a homemaker. He left school at the age of 15 to begin work at a drugstore. This was where he developed a taste for crime, and also where he obtained the expertise that would later be helpful for his drug empire. At the age of 25, he already owned his own drugstore and went into business dealings with some dangerous individuals. Not long after that, he started trading drugs and had no option but to engage in the other crimes that came with the business, such as kidnapping. By 1970, his empire was growing very fast, and he needed capable and familiar hands to keep things ticking. He reached out to his brother, Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela. Together, they formed the Cali Cartel, alongside two others, José Santa Cruz Londoño and Helmer Herrera. Gilberto was known as the chess player due to his business acumen and strategic business decisions. He moved the cartel forward while managing to stay relatively unknown to the authorities. At the time, the Medellin cartel was notoriously more popular because of its flamboyant approach in killings. The Cali cartel, on the other hand, avoided killings. They stayed away from noisy parties, flashy lifestyles, and violence to maintain their low profile. The Cali cartel even focused on marijuana and stayed away from cocaine until the 1980s. As the Medellin cartel got into problems that reduced their influence in the market, the Cali cartel took center stage. By 1990, the Cali cartel was already the leading trafficker of cocaine in the world. They were responsible for supplying 80% of the cocaine that made its way into the US and 90% of the drugs going into Europe. This meant that the authorities had to turn attention to them, especially with the fall of Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. November 15, 1984, Gilberto traveled to Spain with Jorge Luis Ochoa Vázquez for a strategic meeting that would help them expand the business in Europe with the help of the Camorra. However, as the Spanish government caught wind of his trip, they swooped in and took the drug kingpin into custody. Spain was about to extradite Gilberto to the US, but the Colombian government intercepted the transfer and had him returned to Colombia for trial. He was, however, acquitted. In 1995, the attention of the Colombian government turned back to Gilberto's empire. June 9, 1995, the Colombian National Police launched a campaign and raided Gilberto's house. He was found hiding in a TV compartment, and the judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. 7 years into his sentence, he was released for good behavior, but the Colombian authorities arrested him again the following year. December 3, 2004, Gilberto was extradited to the US. 2 years later, he and his brother were sentenced to 30 years in prison. While at a medium-security facility in North Carolina, prison life took its toll on Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela. He contracted multiple chronic illnesses, including COVID, colon and prostate cancer, and 2 heart attacks. At the age of 83 on May 31, 2022, he died of lymphoma at a prison medical center in Butner, North Carolina. Manuel Noriega. Manuel Antonio Noriega Moreno was a Panamanian politician and military officer who built a fortune through drugs by taking advantage of his position as the de facto ruler of Panama. While he never served as the official president, Noriega had so much power that the presidents reported to him, and he got away with anything he wanted. Born in 1934, Noriega led a poor life until he joined the Carrillo's military school and then the School of the Americas. He became a Panamanian army officer afterwards and became friends with Omar Torrijos, who helped him rise through the ranks. When Torrijos took over the presidency, Noriega served as the military intelligence chief, and when Torrijos died in 1981, he quickly stepped in as the de facto ruler 2 years later. Before this, Noriega had a good relationship with United States intelligence agencies, and this afforded him protection. But when the relationship became strained in the late 1980s, his drug trafficking business finally came to light, and thus began the hunt for Manuel Noriega. In March 1988, negotiations for Noriega's resignation started between the US government and him. Several talks were organized amongst the related parties, but they were not conclusive. Everything fell apart with reports that Noriega frustrated the efforts because he never had the intention to resign. December 20th, 1989, the US invaded Panama. A month-long plan that involved 27,000 soldiers and 300 aircraft, it was one of the biggest crackdowns for a very long time. Around 1,000 people lost their lives. 2 weeks after the invasion, Noriega surrendered and was taken to the United States to answer for his crimes. In April 1992, he was convicted of 8 charges and sentenced to 40 years in prison 3 months later. The former ruler of a whole nation reduced to the confines of a single prison room. His sentence was reduced to 17 years, and he got out in 2007, but that was not the end of his suffering. The Panamanian government had already tried him in absentia for the murder of a rival, Spadafora, and other crimes he committed while ruling the nation. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Meanwhile, the French government also requested his extradition because he had been convicted of money laundering through the purchase of luxury apartments in Paris. This meant that he had to stay extra years in a US prison while the other nations applied for extradition. In 2010, the drug lord was extradited to France, who refused to grant him prisoner of war status. He was remanded at the La Santé prison and received a 7-year sentence after conviction. However, Panama's extradition request was granted in 2011, and he was moved to the El Renacer prison for accumulated sentences totaling 60 years. A few months later, he suffered from high blood pressure and a brain hemorrhage. He was also diagnosed with a brain tumor. March 7, 2017, while in surgery to remove the tumor, Noriega suffered a brain hemorrhage and died 22 days later at the age of 83. Oziel Cardinus Guillen. In 1996, Juan Garcia Abrego, the then leader of the Gulf Cartel, was arrested and extradited to the U.S. In his absence and that of other high-ranking individuals within the multi-billion-dollar drug enterprise based in Matamoros, Mexico, a man rose through the ranks to take the reins. His name, Oziel Cardinus Guillen. 3 years later, he was holding 2 U.S. agents from the United States Drug Enforcement Administration and Federal Bureau of Investigation hostage at gunpoint. This proved to be his undoing, as it led to a massive manhunt for him. However, this was not a position he should have been in. Born in 1967 in Matamoros, Cardinus worked as a mechanic from an early age, but his greed was insatiable. He started doing drugs and found himself at the top. He did not believe in solving issues without violence. He was ready to kill anyone who stood in his way. To help him achieve this, he had his own army called Los Zetas, which consisted of ex-military men and commandos. At the command of Cardinus, Los Zetas carried out all forms of crimes, including kidnapping and murder. When they captured 2 U.S. agents in 1999, it was supposed to be the same fate for them. But somehow, the agents made him see the danger of killing U.S. agents. He let them go, but he had already played into the hands of the authorities. His manhunt lasted for 4 years, until he was captured in 2003. He enlisted the help of corrupt prison officials and continued running the drug business from behind bars. All this came to an end in 2007, when he was extradited to the United States, where he faced charges of drug trafficking and money laundering. Cardinus was sentenced to 25 years in prison and was transferred to the United States Penitentiary Terre Haute in Indiana. Thus began his hell on earth. No control, official to bribe, no hit squad to call, and no freedom for a man who once enjoyed the best life had to offer. Even after his release in 2024, the Mexican government arrested and transported him to the Altiplano maximum security prison close to Mexico City. And once again, he was in the midst of dangerous criminals. He remains isolated with little to no contact as he awaits the verdict for his drug-related charges. Juan Raul Garza. January 1991, Thomas Rumbo, a 35-year-old associate of Juan Garza, was tasked with overseeing the shipments of marijuana. But as Thomas got to work, he didn't notice the federal officers observing him as he loaded 360 pounds of illicit drugs into the truck. When the officers approached him and told him what they had just witnessed, Thomas agreed to hand over all the shipment to them. He was free from the officers, but not from Garza. In a desperate attempt to conceal what had happened, Thomas made a hole in the fence and told Garza that his marijuana had been stolen. Garza was skeptical. He got Thomas into the truck and interrogated him. Then, they drove him to a local farm and shot Thomas in the head. He shot the body 4 more times and moved on like nothing happened, but the authorities were getting closer to him. Born in Texas, United States, Juan Raul Garza was an American drug lord and killer linked to 8 murders. He was the son of migrant farmers from Mexico. Start to life was not kind to Garza, but he managed to build something for himself, earning the respect of those around him in the process. He owned a construction business and married the daughter of a respected pastor, with whom he had 4 children. But he was greedy. He wanted more. Around the year 1990, Garza was introduced to drug trafficking, and he quickly rose to the head of a unit that smuggled drugs between the U.S. and Mexico. When the police started sniffing around his business and seizing his goods, he grew paranoid. Garza was convinced that some of his men were working to sabotage his deals. So, he went on a killing spree. His first victim was Gilberto Matos. Gilberto worked with Erasmo de la Fuente, a smuggler associate of Garza. After the police seized a shipment from de la Fuente, Garza ordered his assassination, but this was a man who walked with bodyguards, one of them being Matos, who was killed in his shop. He later ordered the killing of de la Fuente in front of his nightclub. Thomas Rumbo was one of those he personally executed, and police got closer to him around this time. They tapped his phones and got his associates to serve as informants. The United States Customs Service launched an official campaign against Garza in 1992, which led to the arrest of all his associates, but he escaped to Mexico. When he ran low on money, he told an associate to organize a drug trade, but he was captured since the associate was also an informant. The United States government indicted Garza on murder and drug trafficking charges. He was found guilty on all counts. August 10, 1993, Garza was sentenced to death. Although he committed the crimes in Texas, he was moved to USP Terre Haute in Indiana, where he spent 8 years. All his appeals failed. On the 19th of June, 2001, Juan Raul Garza was executed by lethal injection and became one of the first people to be executed under the law. Carlos Enrique later Rivas was a German and Colombian drug lord who founded the Medellin Cartel alongside Pablo Escobar. Born in 1949, he was well known for operating a drug smuggling business from Norman's Cay Island in the Bahamas. Later, as a drug lord like no other, he dedicated a substantial part of his time to reading books by Niccolò Machiavelli, and he admired Adolf Hitler. He took aviation classes at the age of 24 and became a pilot. When he turned to a life of crime, he smuggled stolen cars with his brother. He was caught and sentenced to prison for car theft. After serving his jail term, he turned to the drug smuggling business. Thanks to his aviation training, he could navigate air routes and avoid authorities while smuggling drugs between Canada and the US. He reached a partnership with his prison cellmate George Young, who already had experience with flying marijuana into the US. Leder made huge sums of money from smuggling cocaine using small aircraft. They named him the Henry Ford of cocaine. With so much money at his disposal, he began buying properties at Norman's Cay, forcing the residents off the island. However, the DEA caught wind of his activities and stopped the drug business on the island. In 1987, Leder was arrested in Colombia and transferred to the US. The court slapped him with life imprisonment plus an additional 135 years. This was reduced to 55 years after he offered information about Manuel Noriega. In 1992, he disappeared after they moved him to witness protection. He remained in obscurity until he was released and deported to Germany in 2020 to live out his life like a nobody. Dairo Antonio Usuga. October 22, 2021. Officers with the military team codenamed El Blanco surrounded a hideout in Urabá, Antioquia region of northwestern Colombia, near the Panamanian border. Somewhere in the region was Dairo Usuga, a notorious drug lord on the run. Dairo Antonio Usuga David is a Colombian drug lord currently serving time for crimes such as murder, drug trafficking, and sexual abuse. Also known as Otonio, Dairo is one of the most feared cartel kingpins ever, with crimes spanning many years. Federal prosecutors in New York described him as the most violent and significant Colombian drug trafficker since Pablo Escobar. The 1971-born drug lord was born in Colombia to a modest family. At 18, he joined a guerrilla group against the government and the higher class. When the group was dissolved, he switched to the United Self-Defenses of Colombia, another group with paramilitary and drug trafficking activities. He later took leadership of a drug trafficking group known as Los Urabeños. Warrants for his arrest were out in 2011, and the U.S. placed a $5 million bounty on him. By 2021, he was suffering from a kidney disease, and officials tracked the people who were delivering the medication. The military arrived with hundreds of troops, 20 helicopters, and unmanned surveillance drones. The troops blocked off rivers and roads to prevent an escape. With no way to escape, Dairo surrendered to the police the following afternoon. During his hearing in February 2022, the police suspended proceedings with fear that he may have been planning an escape. Dairo was extradited to the U.S. on May 4, 2022, and the following January, pleaded guilty in a New York court. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison with an additional fine of over $200 million. He was sent to a federal supermax prison, ADX Florence in Colorado, where he will have no influence, power, or freedom to commit more crimes. Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo. Throughout the 1980s, the Guadalajara cartel controlled most of the drug business between the U.S. and Mexico. This cartel was so notorious that other cartels were formed from it, and one of the masterminds behind the establishment was Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo. Born January 8, 1946, he was known as the Godfather, or the Boss of Bosses. Felix Gallardo was no ordinary drug lord. He studied business in school and worked as an agent for the Mexican Federal Judicial Police. Then, he was the family bodyguard for Leopoldo Sánchez Celis, the governor of Sinaloa State. This connection with the governor was what helped him get essential political connections that were key to the establishment of his trafficking business. By the end of the 1980s, the Guadalajara cartel, under his leadership, had taken control of most of Mexico's illegal drug trade. This was made possible after they entered a relationship with Colombian cartels. In 1980, one man started threatening their business. He was Enrique "Kiki" Camarena, a DEA special agent assigned to Guadalajara. Camarena secured the services of trusted informants, leading to the raiding and destruction of marijuana farms. Enraged, Felix Gallardo ordered the kidnapping of Camarena. Camarena was kidnapped and taken to one of the properties of Rafael Caro Quantero, where they interrogated him for 30 hours before killing him. Autopsy reports revealed that they injected Camarena with drugs and put a hole in his skull with a drill. This murder led to a large-scale DEA homicide investigation that implicated Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Rafael Caro Quintero as the masterminds. Gallardo was arrested in April 1989. He received 40 years in prison and an additional 37 years. At the time of his arrest, he maintained his position. He instructed his lawyer to call a meeting of drug lords, where he shared the various routes to kingpins like the Arellano Felix brothers, Carrillo Fuentes, Miguel Caro Quintero, Joaquin Guzman Loera, and Hector Luis Palma Salazar. By 1993, he was transferred to a high-security facility, where he lost control over the drug business as a result of the strict laws in place. His new cell is an 8-by-14-foot cell with no access to recreational facilities. His health is currently in decline, and he suffers from vertigo, deafness, blood circulation problems, and loss of an eye. A huge humiliation for the man who considered himself the boss of bosses. Rafael Caro Quintero. Like Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero was also a co-founder of the Guadalajara Cartel that smuggled drugs and committed other crimes throughout the 1980s. He made millions from trafficking drugs, but it all came crashing down after the senseless murder of Enrique "Kiki" Camarena. He got on the run after the murder but was captured in 1985. He was sentenced to 40 years for his part in Camarena's murder and served time at the Puente Grande, a maximum security prison in Jalisco. He also managed to retain his respect behind bars. This did not amount to much, but he got his freedom after 28 years, after his lawyers were able to take advantage of a legal technicality. The United States was not happy with this development. They put a $20 million bounty on him, but he remained elusive for close to a decade. In July 2022, he was arrested in Sinaloa and sent to the Altiplano prison. He is currently living his life without freedom or luxury, and the US is still on his case. The clock is counting down for him. If he gets extradited to the US, it may be the end of the end for him. With that, we've come to the end of the video. If you fancy more videos like this one, check out our channel. Don't forget to subscribe and click the like button right now.